When the cameras stopped rolling and the red carpet events ended, actress Megan Fox thought she could finally find peace in a luxurious hotel suite overlooking the Pacific coast. What happened in room 1247 that October night would change everything she believed about the supernatural and force her to confront a terror that no amount of fame or fortune could protect her from. The year was 2019, and Megan Fox had just wrapped filming for a supernatural thriller that would never see the light of day. The irony wasn't lost on her later. She'd spent months portraying a woman haunted by vengeful spirits, only to discover that sometimes fiction has a way of bleeding into reality in the most horrifying ways imaginable. The invitation. It started with what seemed like a generous offer from her publicist, Rebecca Martinez. The Grandview Hotel wants to host you for their grand reopening weekend, Rebecca had explained over lunch at a trendy Beverly Hills cafe. Full VIP treatment, penthouse suite, and they're only asking for a few social media posts in return. After the stress of filming, I thought you could use some luxury downtime. The Grandview Hotel had a reputation that preceded it, a legendary establishment that had hosted everyone from Marilyn Monroe to Frank Sinatra during Hollywood's golden age. Recently renovated after being closed for nearly a decade, it was positioning itself as the premier destination for A-list celebrities seeking privacy and opulence. Megan had been hesitant at first. Something about the timing felt off, coming so soon after the unsettling experiences she'd had while filming. But Rebecca insisted, and frankly, Megan needed the break. The movie shoot had been more emotionally draining than she'd anticipated, dealing with supernatural themes that had started to feel uncomfortably real. Just 2 nights, Rebecca promised. You'll love it. The suite has floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, a private terrace, and complete soundproofing. You won't hear a thing from the outside world. Little did Megan know that the soundproofing would work both ways, keeping the outside world from hearing what was about to unfold inside. Arrival at the Grandview. The Grandview Hotel stood like a magnificent fortress against the darkening sky as Megan's car pulled up to the circular driveway. The building itself was a masterpiece of Art Deco architecture, with intricate stone carvings and golden accents that caught the light from the ornate lampposts. Despite its beauty, something about the structure felt imposing, almost predatory in the way it seemed to loom over everything around it. The valet, a nervous-looking young man named David, approached her vehicle with unusual urgency. "Miss Fox, welcome to the Grandview. We've been expecting you." His voice carried an odd undertone, as if he were delivering a warning rather than a greeting. As Megan stepped out of her car, she noticed David's hands were trembling slightly as he handled her luggage. When she thanked him, he looked directly into her eyes for a moment longer than necessary and said, "Ma'am, if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call the front desk immediately. We're here to help." The emphasis on immediately struck her as strange, but she attributed it to the staff being overly eager to please a celebrity guest. The lobby was breathtaking, marble floors that seemed to stretch endlessly, crystal chandeliers that cast dancing shadows on the walls, and original artwork from the 1940s that transported visitors back to Hollywood's most glamorous era. Yet despite the opulence, Megan couldn't shake the feeling that the space felt somehow hollow, as if it were a beautiful shell with something rotten at its core. The hotel manager, Mrs. Catherine Beaumont, greeted her with the kind of practiced charm that came from decades in the hospitality industry. She was an elegant woman in her 60s, impeccably dressed, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. But when she smiled, it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Miss Fox, what an absolute pleasure to have you stay with us," Mrs. Beaumont said, her voice carrying a slight southern accent. "Your suite is ready, and I do hope you'll find everything to your satisfaction. The Grandview has a long history of taking excellent care of our distinguished guests." As they walked toward the elevator, Mrs. Beaumont continued her well-rehearsed speech about the hotel's illustrious past. "You know, your suite, room 1247, has hosted some truly legendary figures. Marilyn Monroe stayed there in 1954, and more recently, several prominent actors have found it to be the perfect retreat from the pressures of Hollywood." But as Mrs. Beaumont mentioned the suite number, Megan noticed that the elderly bellhop nearby went rigid, his face draining of color. When their eyes met, He quickly looked away and busied himself with adjusting some flowers in a nearby vase. Room 1247. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt interminable. Mrs. Beaumont filled the silence with more history about the hotel, but Megan found herself focused on the brass buttons and their numbers. When they passed the 13th floor, or rather, didn't pass it, as the buttons jumped from 12 to 14, she found herself wondering about the stories behind that architectural superstition. The hallway leading to room 1247 was lined with vintage photographs of the hotel's famous guests throughout the decades. As they walked, Megan noticed that several of the frames were empty, with only small plaques indicating where photos should have been. When she asked about this, Mrs. Beaumont's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, those are being restored," she said quickly. "We want everything to be perfect for our guests." The suite itself was nothing short of spectacular. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Pacific Ocean, where the setting sun painted the water in brilliant shades of orange and gold. The living area was spacious and elegantly appointed with vintage furniture that had been lovingly restored to its original glory. A marble fireplace dominated one wall, while the opposite wall featured built-in bookshelves filled with first-edition novels and art books. The bedroom was equally impressive, with a king-sized bed that looked like it belonged in a palace, draped in silk curtains that could be drawn for complete privacy. The bathroom was pure luxury, a marble-lined sanctuary with a clawfoot tub that could have doubled as a small swimming pool and a separate glass shower that offered its own view of the ocean. "The previous guest left these for you," Mrs. Beaumont said, gesturing to a bouquet of white lilies on the coffee table. "A welcome gift, you might say." Megan found this odd, as white lilies were typically associated with funerals, but she didn't want to seem ungrateful. Mrs. Beaumont handed her an old-fashioned brass key along with a modern keycard. "The brass key is for the private elevator to the terrace," she explained. "It's a feature unique to this suite. And please, don't hesitate to call if you need anything. Room service is available 24 hours, and housekeeping can accommodate any request." After Mrs. Beaumont left, Megan found herself alone in the vast suite for the first time. The silence was profound, the soundproofing was indeed as effective as advertised. She couldn't hear traffic, ocean waves, or any of the typical sounds associated with a busy hotel. It was as if she'd been sealed inside a luxurious tomb. The first night, settling in. Megan spent the evening exploring her temporary home and taking photos for her social media posts. The suite was undeniably photogenic, and she found herself genuinely impressed by the attention to detail. Every piece of furniture, every decorative object seemed to have been chosen with care to create an atmosphere of sophisticated elegance. She ordered room service, a bottle of wine and a light dinner, and settled in to watch the sunset from the terrace. The private outdoor space was just as luxurious as the interior, with comfortable seating and perfect views of the coastline. As darkness fell, the city lights created a sparkling tapestry that stretched as far as the eye could see. But as the night deepened, Megan began to notice small things that seemed off. The white lilies, which had been fresh and vibrant when she arrived, appeared to be wilting unusually quickly. By 10 p.m., several petals had already fallen, creating a small pile of white fragments on the dark wood of the coffee table. The temperature in the suite also seemed to fluctuate without explanation. Despite the modern climate control system, she found herself alternately too warm and too cold, constantly adjusting the thermostat without finding a comfortable setting. The air itself felt heavy, as if it were saturated with moisture, even though the ocean breeze should have kept it fresh and clean. Around midnight, as Megan was getting ready for bed, she heard what sounded like footsteps in the hallway outside her suite. This struck her as odd, given that the 12th floor was supposed to be exclusively hers for the weekend. The Grandview had assured her that she would have complete privacy, with no other guests on the same floor. She approached the door and looked through the peephole, but the hallway appeared empty. The vintage lighting cast long shadows between the decorative pillars, creating a pattern of light and dark that made it difficult to see clearly. She convinced herself that she'd heard maintenance staff or security making their rounds, even though the footsteps had seemed to pause directly outside her door. Despite her exhaustion from travel and the emotional toll of recent filming, Megan found sleep elusive. Every time she began to drift off, she felt as though someone was watching her. The sensation was so strong that she found herself checking the locks on the door multiple times and ensuring that the heavy curtains were completely closed. When she finally did fall asleep, it was a restless slumber filled with strange dreams that she couldn't quite remember upon waking, except for a persistent feeling of unease and the image of white flowers scattered across dark water. The second day, growing unease. Megan woke the next morning feeling unrest despite having slept for nearly 8 hours. The suite, which had seemed so welcoming the evening before, now felt oppressive in the harsh light of day. The white lilies had continued to deteriorate overnight, and several of the blooms had turned completely black, as if they'd been burned from within. She called housekeeping to have the flowers removed and was surprised when the housekeeper, a middle-aged woman named Rosa, seemed reluctant to enter the suite. Rosa worked quickly and efficiently, but Megan noticed that she avoided looking directly at certain areas of the room, particularly the corner near the fireplace where shadows seemed to linger even in broad daylight. "Is everything all right?" Megan asked as Rosa prepared to leave with the dead flowers. Rosa paused at the door, her hand on the handle, and for a moment it seemed like she might say something important. Instead, she simply nodded and said, "If you need anything at all, please call immediately. Don't wait." It was the same phrase the valet had used, delivered with the same strange urgency. Megan spent the morning on the terrace, trying to enjoy the ocean view and the California sunshine. She attempted to read a book she'd brought, but found her concentration wavering. The words on the page seemed to blur together, and she kept finding herself staring at the same paragraph without comprehending its meaning. Around noon, she decided to explore more of the hotel. Mrs. Beaumont had mentioned several amenities, a spa, a historic library, and a rooftop garden that might provide a pleasant distraction from her growing sense of unease. The hotel's lower levels were bustling with activity. Other guests moved through the lobby and common areas, staff members attended to various tasks, and everything seemed normal and welcoming. But when Megan asked about accessing the library, the concierge's expression shifted slightly. "I'm afraid the library is temporarily closed for restoration," he said, though his tone suggested this was a recent development. "Perhaps you'd prefer the spa? We have excellent massage therapists available." When she inquired about the rooftop garden, she received a similar response. It seemed that many of the hotel's promised amenities were unavailable, always for vague reasons related to maintenance or restoration. Frustrated, Megan returned to her suite to find that housekeeping had been there again, though she hadn't requested any service. The bed had been made with military precision, fresh towels had been placed in the bathroom, and new flowers, white lilies again, had been arranged on the coffee table. She called the front desk to inquire about the unsolicited housekeeping visit, but the desk clerk seemed confused by her question. "Ma'am, according to our records, housekeeping hasn't been to your suite since this morning when you requested the flower removal," the clerk said. "Are you sure someone was in your room?" Megan looked around the suite again. Everything was definitely different from how she'd left it, but she began to doubt her own memory. The stress of recent months, combined with the strange atmosphere of the hotel, might be affecting her more than she'd realized. The discovery. That afternoon, while organizing her belongings, Megan made a discovery that changed everything. While moving some of her clothes in the bedroom closet, she noticed that one of the wooden panels in the back wall seemed slightly loose. When she pressed against it, it moved inward with a soft click. Behind the panel was a hidden compartment, about the size of a shoebox. Inside, she found a collection of items that made her blood run cold: photographs, newspaper clippings, and personal effects that clearly belonged to previous guests of room 1247. The photographs were the most disturbing. They showed the same suite she was staying in, but taken at different time periods based on the clothing and hairstyles of the people in them. What made them terrifying was that many of the photos appeared to have been taken without the subject's knowledge, candid shots of people sleeping, getting dressed, or simply moving through the room. The newspaper clippings told an even more frightening story. Headlines dating back to the 1950s documented mysterious disappearances, unexplained deaths, and strange incidents, all connected to guests who had stayed in room 1247. The articles used phrases like vanished without a trace, found in a state of complete terror, and no clear cause of death could be determined. Among the personal effects were items that seemed mundane at first glance: a pair of glasses, a wristwatch, a small jewelry box, but each was accompanied by a handwritten note describing its owner's fate. The notes were written in different handwriting, suggesting multiple authors across different time periods. One note, attached to a pair of pearl earrings, read, "Sarah Mitchell, 1967. Found 3 days later in her car at the bottom of Malibu Canyon. No memory of how she got there. Kept speaking about the woman in white until her death 6 months later." Another, clipped to a man's watch, said, "Robert Chen, 1983. Successful businessman who checked in for a weekend retreat. Hotel staff found him catatonic in the suite. Never spoke another word for the remaining 8 years of his life." The most recent note was dated just 2 years earlier, Jennifer Walsh, 2017. Promising young actress. Body found on the beach below the hotel. Ruled a suicide, but her family insists she had no history of mental illness and was excited about upcoming projects. At the bottom of the collection was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. The first entry was dated 1954 and written in elegant script. "My name is Margaret Sinclair, and I fear I may not survive to tell this story in person. I came to the Grandview as a guest, but I have become something else entirely. The woman in white has claimed me, as she has claimed so many others. I write this as a warning to those who come after. The truth about room 1247." Megan's hands trembled as she read Margaret Sinclair's journal. The entries painted a picture of a supernatural entity that had been trapped within room 1247 since the hotel's construction in 1947. According to Margaret's account, during the building's construction, a young woman named Eleanor Whitmore had fallen to her death from the 12th floor. But instead of dying peacefully, her spirit had become bound to the room where she had been working as an interior designer. Eleanor had been deeply in love with the hotel's original owner, Charles Grandview, but their relationship had been a secret. When Charles announced his engagement to a wealthy socialite, Eleanor's heartbreak and rage had created a psychic wound that neither death nor time could heal. Margaret's journal described how Eleanor's spirit fed on the life force of guests staying in the room, particularly those who reminded her of the happiness she'd been denied. Beautiful women, successful people, anyone who seemed to have what Eleanor had lost, they all became targets for her supernatural vengeance. "She appears first as a reflection that doesn't quite match your movements," Margaret had written. "Then as shadows that shouldn't exist in the corners of your vision. Finally, she manifests fully, always wearing the white dress she died in, always with that terrible smile that promises an eternity of shared misery." The journal entries became increasingly frantic as Margaret described her own encounters with Eleanor's spirit. Sleep deprivation, hallucinations, and a growing sense of being watched had gradually worn down her sanity. The final entry was barely legible. "She's here now. Standing at the foot of my bed, just watching. I can see through her to the window beyond, but her eyes are so very real. She's reaching for me now. I understand what she wants. She wants me to join her, to become part of this place forever. I can feel my strength leaving me, flowing into her like water through a broken dam. If you're reading this, run. Don't pack, don't take anything with you. Just run." Below Margaret's final entry, in different handwriting, someone had added, "Margaret Sinclair was found dead in room 1247 on October 15, 1954. Official cause of death, heart failure. She was 28 years old." The manifestation begins. As Megan finished reading the journal, the temperature in the room plummeted. Her breath began to mist in the suddenly frigid air, and the sound of the ocean outside was completely cut off, replaced by an unnatural silence that seemed to press against her eardrums. That's when she saw it. Her reflection in the mirror above the fireplace was moving independently. While Megan stood frozen with the journal in her hands, her reflection was slowly turning its head to look directly at her. The reflection's mouth opened in a smile that Megan wasn't making, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than they should be. She dropped the journal and backed away from the mirror, but the reflection didn't follow her movement. Instead, it raised one hand and pressed it against the glass from the inside, as if trying to push through to the real world. The lights in the suite began to flicker, creating a strobe effect that made everything appear to move in stuttering, unnatural jerks. In the intermittent darkness between flashes, Megan caught glimpses of a figure in white standing in various parts of the room, by the window, near the bed, and the doorway to the bathroom. Each time the lights came back on, the figure was gone, but Megan could feel its presence growing stronger. The air itself seemed to thicken, making it difficult to breathe, and a smell like old flowers and damp earth began to permeate the suite. She grabbed her phone to call for help, but the device wouldn't turn on despite having been fully charged just hours earlier. The hotel phone was similarly dead, producing nothing but silence when she lifted the receiver. Panic beginning to set in, Megan ran to the door, but the modern keycard reader flashed red no matter how many times she tried it. The brass key for the terrace elevator was equally useless. When she tried to use it, the mechanism wouldn't turn, as if the metal had fused into a solid mass. She was trapped. Eleanor's game. That's when Eleanor Whitmore finally appeared in full manifestation. She materialized slowly, like a photograph developing in a darkroom, starting as a faint outline and gradually gaining substance and detail. She was exactly as Margaret's journal had described, a young woman in a white 1940s-style dress, her dark hair styled in victory rolls, her face beautiful but terrible in its expression of eternal rage and sorrow. "Another pretty little actress," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the cadence of a bygone era but with an undertone that suggested vast, inhuman malice. "They always send me the pretty ones. Do you know why that is?" Megan pressed herself against the door, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure Eleanor could hear it. "I don't know what you want," she managed to whisper. Eleanor's laugh was like breaking glass. "Oh, but I think you do. You've read dear Margaret's journal. You know exactly what I want." She began to move closer, and as she did, the air around her shimmered with an otherworldly energy that made Megan's skin crawl. "You see, darling, I've been alone in this room for over 70 years. Do you have any idea what that kind of loneliness does to a soul? It changes you, transforms you into something that can only survive by taking what it needs from others." Eleanor gestured around the suite with one pale hand. "This room has been my world, my prison, and my hunting ground. Every guest who stays here feeds me a little bit of their life force, their happiness, their hope. Most survive the experience, though they leave forever changed. But some." Her smile widened, showing those unnaturally sharp teeth. "Some are special. Some remind me so much of what I once was that I simply can't bear to let them go." "What happened to the others?" Megan asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. "They became part of me," Eleanor said simply. "Their energy, their essence, absorbed into my being. It's really quite intimate, you know. They're still here, in a way. Would you like to meet them?" The air in the room began to shimmer, and Megan saw other figures beginning to materialize, translucent forms that she recognized from the photographs in the hidden compartment. Margaret Sinclair stood near the window, her face a mask of eternal despair. A man in 1960s clothing stood by the fireplace, his eyes vacant and staring. Others appeared throughout the room, all of them bearing the same expression of hopeless captivity. "They're my companions now," Eleanor said proudly. "My eternal guests. And you're going to join them. The fight for survival." But Megan Fox hadn't survived the brutal politics of Hollywood, the pressures of fame, and years of personal struggles only to give up without a fight. As Eleanor moved closer, Megan's mind raced through everything she'd learned from the journal and her own experiences. "You're angry," Megan said suddenly, causing Eleanor to pause in her approach. "You're angry because Charles Grandview chose someone else over you." Eleanor's expression shifted, a flicker of the pain and rage that had created her supernatural prison crossing her beautiful features. "He promised me forever," she hissed. He said we would build this hotel together, create something magnificent that would stand as a monument to our love. Instead, he chose that vapid socialite with her family's money and connections. So you killed yourself to hurt him, Megan continued, slowly moving away from the door and toward the center of the room. You threw yourself from this very floor to make him suffer. I died by accident. Eleanor shrieked, her form flickering with rage. I was trying to leave, to get away from the pain, and I slipped. But when I realized what had happened, when I saw how little he cared about my death, how quickly he moved on with his life, that's when I chose to stay. Megan could see that Eleanor's anger was her weakness. It made her unstable, easier to distract. But staying here, trapping yourself in this room, it didn't hurt him at all, did it? He sold the hotel and moved on. He lived a full life while you remained trapped by your own bitterness. Eleanor's scream of fury shattered every mirror in the suite and sent the other spirits flickering like candle flames in a hurricane. He should have suffered. He should have paid for what he did to me. Instead, you're making innocent people suffer, Megan pressed on. People who had nothing to do with your heartbreak. You've become exactly what he said you were, cruel, selfish, and destructive. The accusation hit home. Eleanor's form began to waver, as if Megan's words were disrupting the psychic energy that held her together. I am not cruel, she said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. I am lonely. I am in pain. Then let go, Megan said softly. Stop holding onto the anger and the hurt. Let yourself move on to whatever comes next. For a moment, Eleanor's expression softened, and Megan caught a glimpse of the young woman she had been before death and decades of rage had twisted her into something monstrous. I can't, Eleanor whispered. I don't know how. The final confrontation. But Eleanor's moment of vulnerability didn't last long. Her face hardened again, and she raised her hands toward Megan. Enough talk. You're going to join me whether you want to or not. Megan felt a terrible pulling sensation, as if something was trying to draw her life force out through her skin. Her vision began to blur, and she could feel her strength ebbing away. Around the room, the other trapped spirits watched with expressions of sympathy and helplessness. That's when Megan remembered something from Margaret's journal, a detail that Eleanor had probably hoped would be forgotten. In her final entries, Margaret had mentioned that Eleanor's power was tied to the room itself, specifically to an object that had belonged to her in life. Fighting against the draining effect of Eleanor's supernatural attack, Megan stumbled toward the fireplace. There, on the mantelpiece, was an ornate music box that she'd noticed but not really examined when she first arrived. It was beautiful, mother-of-pearl inlay with gold trim, clearly from the 1940s. No! Eleanor shrieked as she realized what Megan was doing. Don't touch that. Megan grabbed the music box and opened it. A hauntingly beautiful melody began to play, I'll Be Seeing You, a popular song from the 1940s. But more importantly, opening the box revealed a photograph tucked inside the lid, Eleanor and Charles Grandview together, both young and radiant with love. Eleanor's form began to flicker more violently. Close it, she demanded. You don't understand what you're doing. But Megan did understand. The music box was Eleanor's anchor to the world of the living, the one object that connected her to her human emotions and memories. It was also the source of her power over room 1247. This is what's keeping you trapped, Megan said, holding the music box carefully. Your love for him, preserved in this room like a fly in amber. You're not staying because you're angry, you're staying because you can't let go of loving him. Eleanor's rage crumbled, revealing the heartbroken young woman beneath. It was real, she said, her voice now small and vulnerable. What we had was real, even if it didn't last. I know, Megan said gently. But real love doesn't require trapping people in your pain. Real love wants the other person to be happy, even if it's not with you. Tears began to stream down Eleanor's translucent cheeks. I've been so angry for so long. I've forgotten what it felt like to just love him without the bitterness. Megan made a decision that could have cost her everything. Instead of destroying the music box or trying to escape with it, she held it out toward Eleanor. "Take it," she said. "Take the memory of your love and let it carry you where you need to go." Eleanor stared at the offered music box for a long moment. "Why would you help me? After what I've done, what I was about to do to you?" "Because everyone deserves peace," Megan said simply. "And because I know what it's like to have your heart broken by someone you trusted completely." Resolution. Eleanor reached out with trembling hands and took the music box. The moment her fingers touched it, a warm golden light began to emanate from both her form and the small object. The other trapped spirits around the room began to glow with the same light, their expressions changing from despair to relief. "I remember now," Eleanor said, her voice filled with wonder. "I remember what it felt like to love without conditions, to want someone's happiness more than my own." She looked at Megan with eyes that were now filled with gratitude instead of malice. "Thank you for reminding me who I used to be." One by one, the trapped spirits began to fade away, but their expressions were peaceful now, finally free to move on to whatever awaited them beyond death. Margaret Sinclair was the last to go. She approached Megan and spoke, her voice like a whisper of wind through autumn leaves. "The room will be safe now," she said. "Eleanor's anchor to this place is broken. The hotel can finally be what it was meant to be, a place of rest and beauty, not a trap for the living." Eleanor herself was beginning to fade, but she moved slowly, as if savoring these final moments of existence in the physical world. "I'm going to find him," she said, and for the first time since Megan had encountered her, Eleanor's smile was genuinely happy instead of predatory. "Not to hurt him or demand explanations, but to tell him that I forgive him. And maybe to forgive myself." As Eleanor disappeared entirely, taking the music box with her, the oppressive atmosphere that had filled room 1247 lifted like a weight being removed from Megan's shoulders. The temperature returned to normal, the lights stopped flickering, and the sound of the ocean outside could be heard again through the windows. Aftermath. Megan spent the rest of that night sitting on the terrace, watching the sunrise over the Pacific and trying to process what she had experienced. When housekeeping arrived the next morning, Rosa found her there, still in the same clothes from the day before but somehow looking more at peace than she had since arriving at the hotel. "You look different," Rosa said as she prepared to clean the suite. "Lighter, somehow." "I feel lighter," Megan admitted. "Has anyone ever told you about the history of this room?" Rosa paused in her work and gave Megan a knowing look. "We all knew something wasn't right about 1247. Guests would complain about strange experiences, and some would leave in the middle of the night without explanation. But this morning the room feels different. Clean, somehow." When Mrs. Beaumont came to check on Megan before her departure, she too seemed to sense the change. "I hope your stay was comfortable," she said, though her tone suggested she was genuinely concerned about the answer. "It was transformative," Megan replied honestly. "I think this room has been healed." Mrs. Beaumont's eyes widened slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean by that." "I think you do," Megan said gently. "And I think you've been waiting for someone to finally help Eleanor find peace." The older woman's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing the relief and gratitude beneath. "The Grandview has been in my family for 3 generations," she admitted quietly. "We've always known about Eleanor, always tried to manage the situation as best we could. But we never knew how to help her move on. She needed to remember love instead of pain," Megan said. "Sometimes that's all any of us need." Epilogue: The Change. In the months that followed Megan's stay at the Grandview Hotel, room 1247 became one of the most popular suites in the establishment. Guests consistently reported feeling an overwhelming sense of peace and renewal during their stays, and many claimed that their time there had helped them heal from their own emotional wounds. The hotel staff noticed the change immediately. The temperature fluctuations stopped, the lights remained steady, and the oppressive atmosphere that had lingered around the 12th floor dissipated entirely. Most importantly, there were no more mysterious incidents, no more guests leaving in the middle of the night with stories they couldn't quite explain. Megan never spoke publicly about her supernatural encounter at the Grandview, but those close to her noticed that she seemed different after her return. Friends described her as more empathetic, more willing to help others work through their own pain and trauma. She began volunteering with organizations that helped people heal from heartbreak and loss, and her approach to her own relationships became more open and forgiving. The hidden compartment behind the panel in room 1247's closet was discovered during routine maintenance a few weeks after Megan's departure. The photographs and newspaper clippings were donated to the hotel's historical archive, but the personal effects were finally returned to the families of their original owners, bringing closure to decades-old mysteries. The room still bears a small plaque near the door, installed at Mrs. Beaumont's request, in memory of Eleanor Whitmore, 1922 to 1947. She found her way home. But perhaps the most significant change was that white lilies, when placed in room 1247, no longer wilt and die. Instead, they bloom more beautifully than anywhere else in the hotel, as if blessed by a spirit who has finally learned to choose love over anger, forgiveness over revenge, and peace over the endless cycle of pain that had once defined her existence. The Grandview Hotel continues to operate as one of Hollywood's premier destinations, but now it offers something even more valuable than luxury and privacy. It offers the possibility of healing, of confronting one's deepest pain and emerging stronger on the other side. And sometimes, late at night when the ocean breeze carries the scent of flowers through the windows of room 1247, guests report hearing the faint sound of music, "I'll Be Seeing You," played on what sounds like a vintage music box, a gentle reminder that love, in its truest form, never really dies. For Megan Fox, the experience at the Grandview became a turning point in her life and career. While she continued acting, she also began writing about healing and forgiveness, drawing on her supernatural encounter to help others understand that sometimes the most terrifying experiences can become gateways to profound personal growth. The ripple effect. Word of the changes at the Grandview Hotel spread quietly through Hollywood's inner circles. While Megan never revealed the supernatural details of her stay, other celebrities began requesting room 1247 specifically, drawn by reports of the suite's unusually peaceful atmosphere and its apparent ability to help guests find clarity during difficult periods in their lives. A prominent director, struggling with creative block after a series of commercial failures, spent a week in the suite and emerged with the concept for what would become his most critically acclaimed film. A pop star dealing with addiction found the strength to enter rehab after just one night in room 1247, later crediting the experience with saving her life and career. The room had transformed from a supernatural trap into something approaching a sanctuary, a place where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds remained thin, but now offered healing rather than harm. Mrs. Beaumont commissioned a discreet investigation into the hotel's history, working with local historians and paranormal researchers to document Eleanor Whitmore's story properly. What they discovered painted a picture of a talented young woman whose contributions to the hotel's original design had been deliberately erased from official records after her death. Eleanor had been more than just Charles Grandview's secret lover. She had been the creative force behind many of the hotel's most beautiful and innovative features. The Art Deco flourishes that gave the building its distinctive character, the carefully planned sightlines that maximized ocean views from every floor, even the acoustics that allowed for perfect sound isolation, all had been Eleanor's designs. She was a visionary, the lead historian told Mrs. Beaumont. In a different era, she might have become one of the most celebrated architects of her generation. Instead, she was relegated to the shadows, her work credited to men who simply implemented her ideas. This revelation added another layer to Eleanor's story. Her rage hadn't just been about romantic betrayal, it had been about the systematic erasure of her identity and achievements. Finding peace had required not only letting go of her love for Charles, but also reclaiming her sense of self-worth independent of his recognition or approval. The final truth. 6 months after Megan's encounter with Eleanor, she received an unexpected package at her home in Los Angeles. Inside was an antique photograph she'd never seen before, along with a letter from Mrs. Beaumont. The photograph showed the Grandview Hotel during its original construction in 1947. In the foreground, a young woman in work clothes stood consulting architectural drawings while construction workers built the framework around her. The woman was clearly Eleanor Whitmore, captured in her element as the true architect of the hotel's beauty. Mrs. Beaumont's letter explained, this photograph was found in Charles Grandview's private papers after his death in 1982. It had been hidden away for 35 years, along with documentation proving Eleanor's authorship of the hotel's design. I thought you would want to see her as she truly was, not as a vengeful spirit, but as a brilliant woman whose work continues to bring joy to thousands of people. The letter continued, we've added a permanent exhibit in the lobby honoring Eleanor's contributions to the hotel. Her story is being told properly now, and room 1247 has been designated as the Eleanor Whitmore Suite. We've also established a scholarship in her name for young women pursuing careers in architecture and design. But the most significant revelation came in the letter's final paragraph. Something remarkable has been happening since your stay. Guests in the Eleanor Whitmore Suite report having vivid, positive dreams about their creative projects and personal relationships. Several have described encounters with a young woman in 1940s clothing who offers encouragement and advice. Unlike the terrifying manifestations of the past, these interactions leave people feeling inspired and hopeful. It seems Eleanor hasn't left entirely, Mrs. Beaumont concluded. But now she's choosing to help rather than harm. Whatever you did that night, it didn't just free her from her prison of rage, it transformed her into something better than she was even in life. Megan's reflection. As Megan sat in her garden reading Mrs. Beaumont's letter, she found herself thinking about the parallels between Eleanor's story and her own experiences in Hollywood. The entertainment industry was still a place where women's contributions were often minimized or erased, where talented individuals could be destroyed by forces beyond their control. But Eleanor's transformation offered hope. It suggested that even the deepest wounds could heal, that anger and bitterness didn't have to define a person forever, and that sometimes the most powerful thing someone could do was simply choose love over revenge. Megan kept the photograph of Eleanor on her desk as a reminder of that lesson. Whenever she faced challenges in her career or personal life, whenever she felt tempted to respond to injustice with bitterness, she would look at the image of the young architect and remember that true strength came from building something beautiful rather than tearing down what others had created. The continuing mystery. The story of room 1247 didn't end with Eleanor's peaceful departure. If anything, it evolved into something even more intriguing. The suite became a pilgrimage destination for those seeking creative inspiration or emotional healing, though the hotel carefully managed this phenomenon to prevent it from becoming a circus. Requests to stay in the Eleanor Whitmore Suite were carefully screened. Mrs. Beaumont and her staff developed an intuitive sense for which guests would benefit from the room's unique properties and which might be seeking cheap thrills or exploitative opportunities. Artists, writers, musicians, and others in creative fields found the suite particularly conducive to breakthrough moments. A novelist struggling with writer's block completed her first draft in 3 days. A composer discovered a melody that had been eluding him for months. A painter created her most celebrated work after a single night in the room. But the suite's influence wasn't limited to creative endeavors. People dealing with grief, relationship difficulties, and major life transitions also found unexpected clarity and peace during their stays. Marriage proposals in the Eleanor Whitmore Suite had a 100% success rate, and several couples credited the room with saving their relationships. The staff began keeping a discreet guest book specifically for room 1247, allowing visitors to record their experiences anonymously. The entries painted a picture of a space where the normal rules of reality seemed slightly relaxed, where intuition was heightened, and where people could access wisdom they didn't know they possessed. One entry, written in elegant handwriting that bore a striking resemblance to Eleanor's own script, simply read, "The greatest architecture isn't built with stone and steel, but with love, forgiveness, and the courage to create beauty from pain." The legacy. Years later, when paranormal investigators and journalists tried to piece together what had really happened at the Grandview Hotel, they found a frustrating lack of concrete evidence. Security cameras from that period had mysteriously malfunctioned, official incident reports were curiously vague, and most of the people involved were reluctant to discuss details. But the transformation of room 1247 from a place of supernatural terror to one of healing and inspiration was undeniable. The hotel's reputation changed completely, evolving from a location whispered about in dark corners of Hollywood to a celebrated retreat for anyone seeking renewal and creative breakthrough. Eleanor Whitmore's architectural scholarship grew into a significant foundation, helping dozens of young women pursue careers in design and architecture. The scholarship recipients often visited the hotel, and many reported feeling a special connection to room 1247 and its inspiring atmosphere. The suite's guest book eventually filled several volumes, each containing hundreds of testimonials from people whose lives had been touched by their experience in the room. Common themes emerged: dreams that provided crucial insights, sudden clarity about difficult decisions, and an overwhelming sense of being supported by a benevolent presence. The final word. Megan Fox never returned to the Grandview Hotel after that transformative weekend in 2019, but she remained in contact with Mrs. Beaumont and continued to follow the suite's ongoing story. She established her own foundation focused on helping people heal from emotional trauma, drawing inspiration from her encounter with Eleanor's spirit. In interviews, when asked about pivotal moments in her personal growth, Megan would sometimes reference a weekend that taught me the difference between holding on to pain and transforming it into something beautiful. She never elaborated, but those close to her understood that she was referring to an experience that had fundamentally changed her perspective on forgiveness, healing, and the possibility of redemption. The last entry in the original Room 1247 guest book was written in 2025, 6 years after Megan's stay. It was signed simply EW and read, "To all who find their way to this room, remember that every ending can become a new beginning, every wound can become a source of wisdom, and every heart that has known true love, no matter how briefly, carries within it the power to heal not just itself, but the world around it." The walls of this room have witnessed pain and joy, despair and hope, endings and beginnings. They stand as a testament to the truth that love, in its purest form, never dies. It simply transforms, grows stronger, and finds new ways to touch the lives of those who need it most. The Grandview Hotel continues to operate today, and Room 1247, the Eleanor Whitmore Suite, remains one of the most requested accommodations in all of Hollywood. Guests still report extraordinary experiences, moments of clarity, creative breakthroughs, and encounters with a gentle presence that seems invested in their happiness and success. Eleanor Whitmore's story has become part of the hotel's official history, no longer hidden or denied but celebrated as an example of how love can triumph over anger, how creativity can outlast injustice, and how even the most troubled spirits can find peace when shown compassion instead of fear. And sometimes, when the ocean breeze carries the scent of white lilies through the windows of Room 1247, guests still hear that faint, beautiful melody, "I'll be seeing you," a reminder that true love transcends death, that talent transcends recognition, and that every soul, no matter how lost, can find its way home. For Megan Fox, that weekend at the Grandview taught her that the most important battles aren't fought against external enemies, but against the pain and anger within ourselves. Eleanor's story became a guiding principle in her life, that healing is always possible, that forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply choosing love over fear. The supernatural encounter that began as a nightmare had transformed into one of the most profound and meaningful experiences of her life, proving that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose what we become, and sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get the chance to help someone else make that same choice. In the end, Room 1247 stands as more than just a luxury hotel suite. It's a monument to the enduring power of compassion, a testament to the possibility of redemption, and a reminder that every ending, no matter how dark, contains within it the seeds of a new and more beautiful beginning.